Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dawn of Yangchen chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 37, which is called Exposure. So this is the chapter that catches us up with a few things. Okay, Thapa got taken out, but how did this happen? There's some time to fill in between Jujinta basically informing Kavik that basically Yangchen is here, and the whole plan sort of seemingly going off without a hitch. So we find out that, one, Thapa was actually the second combustion bender takedown, that Zhao Yun has already been taken out prior to this, then Thapa, and so this chapter really revolves around the takedown of the third combustion bender, which doesn't go as smoothly as the first two, because of course she realizes that other explosions have stopped, so someone is taking out the others around her. That's what Ying Su decides to do. She goes to the fallback position, gets very, very defensive, and it's the classic combustion bender situation. How do we handle this? And so this is the sort of team in a way coming together here, and Jujinta becoming very, very important in things as they kind of come to a conclusion here, because that's the thing about this chapter. This chapter brings the threat of these three combustion benders to an end. They are all captured by the end of this. So Hansha's plan ends here. But it's interesting how the book chooses to kind of like go with the ending and how secretive things need to be. But anyway, so first of all, we covered the idea of, okay, who got them information about the locations of the combustion benders? And that was Kavik. Kavik had already started the hunt for Hansha and his assets before Jujinta knocked on his door, slipping out of the house when he could, doing his best not to worry his parents. He knew the faces of the firebenders, so that's the key point, because he was on the ship with them and realized that they were the guards. He knows what they look like, and so can follow them because of that. And then, it says here, one night, acting on the hunch he might find luck in a stretch of street that had a handful of Fire Nation restaurants, Kavik spotted Thapa entering an establishment that was closed. And so that's how he found out where Thapa was. And he followed him back to where Thapa is staying, which is effectively the building that overlooks the outskirts of the city. And at the top of it, that's where he's firing his combustion blasts from. So the idea is that he effectively does the same for like the other ones kind of going forward. From there, Kavik followed the Zongdu of Bin'er to the other two locations across the city. He waited outside one of the buildings, wedged between debris in an alley, until he heard the pop close up and saw with his own eyes barely a thin wisp of smoke jetting from a window, followed immediately by an explosion further away. So he sees much more clearly, I suppose, how the ability works, and so gives good information to Yangchen as she arrives on the scene. So they're talking here, I need to get close to them. The rest of you will be on lookout and cleanup duty. So Yangchen seems to immediately know, okay, I can take them out if I get close enough, and it won't be too much of a problem. And it just says here, the first raid on Zhao Yun's position had been executed smoothly. Kavik had stationed himself under the firebender's position to give the signal. Yangchen had gone in alone, and as promised, dealt with Zhao Yun so efficiently Akudan and Taiyagum only had to pick up the man's unconscious form. They repeated the process for Thapa, and got a bonus of getting Hansha as well. Yangchen still wouldn't allow anyone to witness how she defeated the firebender without a fight. And then we catch up to the sort of present day, and it's like apprehending the last member of Unanimity, however, it was not going so well. Explosions are going off, and we get the idea that the problem was that Ying Su was able to summon her technique much quicker than the other two, and they didn't have an accurate count of the minimum time between detonations. So she seems to be a little bit more on par with sort of what we know to expect from combustion benders. It still doesn't seem like she's firing them off as rapid fire as a combustion man or a Palit, but it's quicker than the other two. She doesn't need to do like 20, 30 breaths, but it still feels like there seems to be that idea that she has to be like, fire, pause, 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 then maybe fire again. So it's nowhere near quite the efficiency of other combustion benders, and there's still a sense that she probably still has to do like at least 5 to maybe 10 breaths between an attack. So yeah, she has moved back to the fallback secondary location, the Bin-Er Gathering Hall, a perfect defensive position. So this is again the location with the heated floors from like earlier on in the book, where Yangchen did like her spying, where she had her meeting with Hansha in the first place. So that's where she has kind of held up in. So she's in a building and just fending off kind of Yangchen and crew here. So they're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do here? Because she's not letting us anywhere near her. And again, they seem to have good tactics. They're not falling for tricks and using their blast needlessly, in that Yangchen chucks a giant boulder at the location, expecting that maybe Yingsu will blast the boulder, and then in the time between her next attack, Yangchen can go up and get her. But no, she lets the boulder hit the building and is ready to go with her next sort of like stay away from me blast. So they're at a stalemate here overall. Then we cut to Yangchen's perspective, and her immediate thought is that like he's going to die, because Kavik in this operation is putting himself at great risk, because he's the one who's effectively found all the locations. He has to sort of, in a way, sneak up like under the position where everyone else is. So he's sort of nearby to sort of give the signal about where someone is, and she's very worried about him. That's what's going on here, and she feels that if he dies in this mission, it will be her fault. So this is when she sort of catches us up with the whole like, what happened with Jujinta? Like, how did those two actually come to meet? And Jujinta speaks to her here in the present day and is like, it'll be all right. Jujinta was staring at her. On her return to Jondari from Port Tugok, Nujian had diverted his flight path and beelined for an isolated meadow where a strange boy, not Kavik, was meditating and blowing on her bison whistle with every exhalation. Yangchen's surprise was immense. So was the boy's. The impact of the Avatar appearing during his prayers had resonated deeply within Jujinta, who introduced himself as a friend of Kavik's after he relayed a simple message that Jondari wasn't safe and that Yangchen had to get back to Bin-Er. His stony visage crumbled and he'd fallen to her feet, weeping. She had to improvise quickly, figure out the intentions behind Kavik's ploy. Yangchen played the part of gentle, compassionate nun and took Jujinta with her, along with her safe house runner. So this is why Taigum and Akudan are there as well. So that's how the team formed. She took the Jondari people with her from there. And Jujinta is the one being kind of quite confident about this. We will serve you. We will not let you down. Look, your men return. And so Akudan and Taigum are back. And so this is the plan to deal with the last combustion bender. Yangchen and Jujinta have sent Taigum and Akudan to bring something back. And what they brought is a water tribe bow. So they give it to Jujinta and he's like, okay, yes, this will be good. And it's really cool. Yangchen notes that you're violating an oath right now, aren't you? A taboo. From the memories of one of her past lives, she understood the meaning of his scoured nose, his penitent rituals, his self-imposed exile. But Jujinta just says, this is more important, and picks up the bow. In his hands, the weapon seemed to pour new life, or rather an old one, into the rest of his body, like a withered plant receiving water after a drought. He strung it deftly, and drew on the string without releasing it several times to test the weight, using his thumb despite not having a ring. And he's like, iron spruce, water tribe make, cable backed, about 1 1/4 she, original owner taller than me, give me the arrows. And they just note that like he throws away most of the quiver of arrows and kind of chooses and picks up like 2 that he likes. So he picks up the arrow that he really likes and is like, yeah, I can make the shot, but you will need to draw her out into the open. I have to actually, see her so I can actually like get a, focus, get her in my sights and then release the arrow. but obviously I need at least a second or two to acquire her without her blowing us up. So basically a distraction is needed. So this is where Yangchen realizes, okay, it has to be me. I'm the air nomad. I'm the one with the abilities that will allow me to sort of dodge most effectively. So she decides she has to make the risky move here. So she goes out right in the middle of the street and is just like, "You stand before the avatar." Like, she's screaming this out loud. She chooses not to go into the avatar state because, you know, if she gets hit with a combustion blast, she'd die in the avatar state. She can't have that happen. So she just tries to do the big avatar state voice and hope that, you know, even someone in this situation won't just try and, like, basically gun down an air avatar, an air nomad. But she says, "We will talk, we will come to terms." But all she gets in response is an explosion thrown her way. She manages to dodge it using airbending assisted speed. And she basically darts forward, sort of, I suppose, like under the blast, and, like, you know, rolls to a halt. The blast doesn't really hit anything, but, you know, she gets caught in the kind of like backdraft in a way, and it's kind of knocked a little bit to the ground. But she's an airbender, so she can sense stuff going through the air, and she immediately senses that, like, oh, the arrow has been let loose, and suddenly, like, she's right next to the window at this point, and it's kind of like, okay, I'm in position now. Do I do it? Do I do what I did for the other two to take out this combustion bender, or do I trust that the arrow has hit and just walk in? So it says here, she neutralized him and the other members of Unanimity by using a vile ability, one she could not let anyone know about. She put her hands out and for the third time today prepared to remove the air from the room behind the door. Anyone trapped inside the sphere of emptiness she created would be unable to breathe and lose consciousness in a little more than 10 seconds. Death would follow shortly afterwards if she kept it going, and the most frightening part was they never see it happening. So, there was only an unreliable sliver of time in which she could maintain the technique and remain true to the air nomad principles of holding life sacred. One mistake, and she'd be matching lethality with lethality, paying back the destructiveness of Unanimity with bending just as insidious. A perfectly even transaction. But then she decides, like, no, there hasn't been any sound from inside since she heard the arrow go. And so she decides that I'm not going to take the risk on this one. I think she's been got. So she walks into the room, and Yingsu's in the corner, like, desperately trying to deal with, like, the arrow is, like, stuck in... Where does this describe it here? She clutched the arrow stuck under her collarbone. So, like, that's, like, what? Somewhere, like, here, give or take, either side. And she's struggling with all the blood. She's not used to getting hit. That's what she's focused on, not trying to, like, fire back or anything like that. And so Yangchen immediately realizes that, like, okay, this is a full-on hit. If I taken the air out of the room, she probably would have died instantly because this is quite a bad wound. So Yangchen immediately gets some snow, melts it, and starts to heal Yingsu. And she's like, don't move, no one's dying today. And interestingly, the woman gave up and closed her golden eyes. Thank you, she muttered. So, again, sort of like we got from Thoppa, he's only really there for the money. It doesn't really seem like he has specifically terrible motivations. Now, with Thoppa, of course, we have the idea that he didn't seem to really have that much of a problem with suddenly blow up those houses, kill people. Maybe they're all sort of like that, but at least with Yingsu here, she seems to be sort of thankful that the Avatar actually came in to heal her, that she doesn't want to die, and ultimately, you know, is respectful of the situation overall. But yeah, that's where the chapter comes to an end. All three combustion benders dealt with, Honsha captured, meaning that effectively, you know, who's going to control Bin-Er? But obviously the people causing the explosions are gone, but most of the people don't know what it actually was. They don't know it was benders. Only a few people knew what it was. So in the aftermath of all of this, it's all going to be about, I suppose, what information is key for people to know. And now that Honsha is out of the way, it seems like Yangchen can actually have an influence on Bin-Er. But the threat of combustion benders is still around. They still have these 3 captured. 3 incredibly dangerous benders. What do they do with them? Because basically we get the idea they're going to have to like hide them. No one else can find out about them. But we'll explore that more as they cover that in the chapters to come. But obviously there's a few other things as well. Like, okay, Kavik and Yangchen worked well on this mission, but they haven't really properly talked. And so a lot is going to come out here about, you know, the truth, the fact that Kavik betrayed Yangchen. That has to be addressed. But for now, they have worked together to take down this crazy threat here of the unanimity. And it's a good chapter. I like a lot of the references here of, like, you know, covering the idea that Yingsu like is a bit quicker with her blasts. So that's nice to know the difference between her and the other 2. That the first bender got taken out quite quickly, Zhao Yun. Kavik actually was quite helpful with his errand running skills to actually locate where everyone was. I love the Jujinta bit of, like, he comes in clutch of, like, a Yuyan finally using his bow. A little bit more insight into what the situation was there. He obviously felt so dishonored that he chose to never use a bow, which is why he was using knives before. A past avatar seems to know something about either just a different style of, like, Fire Nation dishonor, or specifically something about Yuyans, which is kind of interesting. And then, the reveal of how she actually takes out the benders with sucking the air out of an entire room. Now, FCE, in a recent interview with Comic Book Resources, I think it was the second part of his interview, was asked the question of, like, was this how Yangchen takes out the combustion benders? Was it a reference to what seems to be the case of Gyatso during Sozon's comet? Is that why there's so many firebenders around him? Did he suck the air out of that area and that's what happened? And the response in the text interview, of course, is just wink. So obviously I think that's meant to be the reference there, is that, like, he views that as being how he interprets what happened with Gyatso there, and that Yangchen doing it here is an example of that. And it makes sense. It does make complete sense of this idea of, if you absolutely need to knock someone out, here is this very effective way to do it if you are fully in control. Now, obviously, a more violent airbender, here's a very easy way to kill people as well. And that's why she's so careful to not show anyone this, because the air nomads have an amazing reputation in the world right now. If people were to know that effectively master airbenders are, like, really in the grand scheme of things probably the most lethal benders out there, that would be terrible if it spread around. It's perfect to deal with this massive threat by doing the kind of forbidden airbending move, but you sort of see the problem and the challenge for Yangchen of, like, timing it perfectly, that she knocks out and makes it safe for people to go in there, but doesn't kill the person. And then, her making the decision in the end ultimately, I suppose, show compassion and trust in the situation, and it ultimately saved Yingsu's life. So I'm wondering, will that come into play later on? That, like, Thapa and Zhao Yun, like, don't really owe her anything as such, but Yingsu sort of does. So with regards to the individual characters here, I find that interesting, because obviously we haven't really characterized them so far. Thapa is the one who has talked the most, Yingsu a little bit more, and then Zhao Yun is just sort of the other one, so we don't really know much about him. So I think they're purposely being very vague here, because I think, again, the combustion bending stuff will be more explored in the next book in terms of, like, the origins of this. Chai-Si is going to have to come into play in a much bigger way, and these characters are still alive, and as we'll see, they're placed in quite an interesting position. But overall, that is the chapter. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on chapter 37, but otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.